Hello devotees, so I spent 30 days maining Kaveh in Genshin Impact, going from 0 to hero. Kaveh is actually a character that I looked forward to building since he's pretty unique, as he can work with a lot of different characters and be built in a variety of ways to fit how we want to play Genshin. In this series, each day I slowly raise up a character if needed, and fought different bosses and enemies in the overworld, trying out different team comps that you guys suggested, and eventually tackle the Spiral Abyss by the end of the month, to see if I successfully mastered the character. Kaveh is actually the second Denzo character featured in this series, with the first one being Yao Yao, but he's also the first DPS character that I got to try out for this series. So the teams are gonna be built around him rather than being a support role, so it's Kaveh's time to shine. My Kaveh also doesn't have any constellation as well, so this will be a good experience for me. Speaking of Denzo characters, I might be building another one in my next episode as well, and I need your help. I'm trying to surpass Kirara's Tale in subscriber counts, so if you want to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to me to help me, and Kaveh out. Without further ado, here's how I brought Kaveh from 0 to hero in 30 days. On day 1, I just stuffed random artifacts on my Kaveh so he can actually deal more damage in general. Since I also just got him, I paired him up with the Sumeru gliders as well. I went to farm for his essential materials by fighting the Denzo hypostasis. Since Kaveh is a Denzo character, he'll be mostly supporting my characters against his boss, since the boss is immune to Dendro. I got a comment suggesting a Sino team with Kaveh, so I thought this would be the perfect chance to include them together. I also brought Baizu to tag along to gain some EXP from fighting this boss, so I could basically level both characters up together. I had Shincho as well, just to provide Hydro, even though he wasn't really important against this boss in general. I just used physical attacks to slowly chip down the boss's HP, and in the final phase, I used Baizu to light up the Denzo cores to activate the rifts, while Kaveh helps out emotionally, and we defeated the boss to get surprisingly 3 creeper drops, and ended the day on a high note. I started off day 2 by leveling up Kaveh to level 20, and also ascended him as well. After that, I used my EXP book to get him to level 39, but I soon realized I did not have any of his morning flowers to ascend him further. Luckily, I was able to invade some worlds to collect them. I also collected some of these ores as well, although nobody needs them yet. But yeah, I got a good haul of morning flowers, so we'll be able to ascend Kaveh further hopefully soon. On day 3, I continued farming for Kaveh's essential materials. This time I brought a Raiden team with me to speed up the boss fight, but I guess we have to take it slow since I only got 2 creepers this time. I ran out of resins, so I don't have anything else to farm for now, so I just logged off for the day. So on day 4, I attempted a domain with a random bloom team I just came up with. Since Kaveh is still only level 40, he was mostly there to explode the Denzo cores like my other characters generated. Kaveh was able to infuse his attacks with Dendro, so paired up with a Hydro off-field character like Yalan, made it so he could generate the Denzo cores himself as well with his normal attacks. Being able to blow up a Denzo cores on demand is pretty nice with Kaveh, and at level 40, he was able to deal around 6,000 damage with each Denzo core explosion. I was pretty impressed, so hopefully this means that we'll be able to do much more damage with a proper build after I'm done leveling him up. On day 5, I continued to farm for more creeper drops from the Denzo cube. I brought a Yoime team with me this time, and of course Kaveh and Baizu for Dendro. Burning wasn't exactly the best for this fight, but we eventually got it to the part where we needed Dendro, so I quickly lit up the piffs, and just let Kaveh chill for a bit before the boss's inevitable death. I collected the boss drops and surprisingly got 3 creeper drops as well, so I was able to ascend Kaveh to 50, and ended the day leveling him up to level 49. Starting out on day 6, I replaced some of Kaveh's artifacts and gave him the Flower of Paradise set for the bloom reactions, and used mostly Elemental Mastery stats as well for him. A lot of you guys suggested an EM build with him, along with the free milled flower weapon that we got a few patches back, so I tested out this build with a bloom team. I used the team suggested by A and opted to go with a double Dendro and double Hydro team, using Denzo Traveler as well. So Kaveh's rotations are pretty simple. We first wet the enemies, and then apply some Dendro of Traveler. After that, we basically just burst the Denzo cores with Kaveh's skills, and boom, you do a pretty good amount of damage. The enemies in the deserts were pretty easy though, and they died before I could get a full rotation in. While we're in this process, Kaveh also got to level 50, so I quickly opened the character menu to ascend him again, and leveled him up to 59. While exploring the desert, I also collected the morning flowers for Kaveh as well. I also started to get used to some of Kaveh's rotations by defeating a few enemies and dying myself. Starting off day 7, I ascended my Kaveh again and was able to level him up to level 69. Since he was still not maxed out yet, I returned to the desert to fight a Dendro cube. I used Hu-Tao to burn it up, and both Kaveh and Baizu were able to light up the Dendro Piffs to defeat the boss. We got 2 creeper drops again, so it was a bit unfortunate, but yeah, we ended our first week here, but we'll get to actually try out Kaveh with various team comps now that we ascended him. On day 8, I brought my Kaveh Bloom team out to Sumeru for a stroll, and looked for some fungi enemies to farm for my talent level up materials. The reason why I'm using a Bloom team here was because I didn't want to activate or burn the fungi, so Hydro and Dendro were good to deal with the fungi. As I was running around, I also accidentally triggered a story quest. We got to beat up some eremites, and we kinda overdone it. Anyways, we continue to farm for more fungi drops, and managed to do some nice damage with Kaveh. So far, Kaveh seemed to be a very good Dendro driver, and being able to restore HP after the Dendro course explodes makes him a great on-field character for Dendro reactions. We got a decent amount of fungi drops just running around Sumeru, and I was also getting used to Kaveh's rotation and playstyles as well. Fighting a consecrated beast in the desert was definitely better to get a gist of his Bloom playstyle, since the enemy had more HP, so we could actually get a rotation in before the enemy dies. This playstyle was definitely fun, and there are a lot more teams to try out, so I'm excited for it. On days 9 and 10, I focused on raising my Kaveh's level and talents. First, I crafted some crystal chunks and ascended Kaveh again. I raised him to 79 and also started to level up his talents since we farmed a lot of fungi the day before. Since my goal is to max ascend Kaveh, I went back to the desert to face off with the cube again. Well, my Sentinel basically ended the fight in mere seconds, so the cube didn't really put up a fight this time. I guess that's why we got 2 creeper drops, since the boss got angry at us for beating it up too fast. I spent the rest of my resins farming for Kaveh's talent materials inside the domain, and pretty much cleared it in less than 40 seconds. We got to try out the Bloom team again, and even without Nahida, we were able to deal with considerable amount of damage, now that we upgraded his talents. After that, I returned to the desert again, and using Sino, just finished up the fight really quickly and collected my drops. On day 11, I did a Sumeru combat event and was able to try out a lot of different team comps with Kaveh. For the first challenge, I brought a Nilo Bloom team with Yao. Blessing was pretty straightforward. Yao provides a Dendro application and heal. Nilo and Xingqiu both apply Hydro to enemies, and Kaveh acts as a tank and extra Dendro applications as well. Nilo's Super Bloom can deal a lot of damage to enemies, and also to yourself. So having Kaveh was actually really good because his healing passive works perfectly in these kinds of situations. So you can just walk around and defeat all the enemies. Next, I tried the standard Hyper Bloom team with Cookie. Instead of Nahida, I used Dendro Traveler and Kaveh for Dendro applications. Traveler was mostly layered to provide Kaveh's energy to get his elemental burst back up, but this team is actually a pretty good budget Hyper Bloom team. After that, I swapped my artifact pieces to Gilded Dreams and used a Serpent Spine for Kaveh to test out a spread team. Beidou and Facial were enough to keep the electro applications going, and Kaveh was able to make use of his burst to deal Dendro damage against the enemies. This was actually my first time trying out this kind of team, and it was pretty fun. We were able to clear this domain rather easily as well. On day 12, I continued the event and was able to try out a Fridge team. Rosaria and Xingqiu can freeze the enemies, and we just use Kaveh to blow up a Dendro course while the enemies are frozen. This team is actually pretty neat, since even though Cryo doesn't have a direct reaction with Dendro, being able to immobilize the enemies with freeze helps out with our crowd control, making it easier to hit enemies with our Dendro course. The next day, I went to do some weekly reputation quests to test out another team comp. The enemies had a good amount of HP, so we were able to test out our rotations and damage with this team. Sucrose was layered to provide EM and crowd control, but otherwise it was a pretty standard Bloom team. Sucrose could also pull the Dendro course closer to the enemy, so it was actually pretty useful, since we just gather the seeds and burst them with Kaveh. Right now I'm doing around 14k per Bloom, so it's alright. The Electro Lavacho Sparky also steals my Bloom with his attacks, but luckily Kaveh was able to control when the Dendro cores explode with his skills as well. So on day 14, I focused on getting my Kaveh to level 90 by collecting more morning flowers. While gathering, I also fought some enemies with the Nilo team, and the enemies just died instantly. So I went to fight a tankier beast right after I collect this last flower. Anyways, Nilo is probably Kaveh's best partner for a Bloom team, since they play off each other really well. So I'll definitely keep this in mind later on when I challenge the Abyss. Afterwards, I went around the desert and collected a chest, while gathering the rest of the morning flowers in my world, and basically ended the second week here. So reaching the halfway mark on day 15, I used both Yaemiko and Kachin to tackle the Dendro Cube, to change things up, to hopefully be able to get 3 boss drops. Electro is probably the best element against this boss, since we can just aggravate the Dendro Cube without needing any Dendro. So the fight itself was pretty easy. After defeating a boss, we actually got 3 creepers, so that was nice. I also raised Kaveh's talents a little bit more, before running out of fungi materials again. On day 16, I went to the onion tree to buy some crafting materials for Sumeru weapons. I got a suggestion to craft a Forest Regalia weapon since Kaveh needs some energy recharge stats, but I realized I didn't have enough claymore builders for it. Anyways, I decided to go and farm for some fungi drops again, and used a pretty nice bloom team to get us through the farming. Again, I had to use a pure bloom team, since my team was pretty restricted farming for fungi. So this Kaveh team was pretty solid. It was pretty satisfying to go through Sumeru and farm the fungi, especially with a bloom team that just pops everything. Even without a healer in this team, Kaveh was full HP most of the time, so this team is actually pretty viable in the overworld. On day 17, I went around trying a different team to farm for some artifacts and bosses. This team was suggested by Yanfei, and while Nino wasn't able to activate her bloom passives because we had a pyro and animal in our team, she was able to still apply Hydro to nearby enemies with her skill. I put Shincho in my team and went to fight the Primordial Bishop boss. Since we still had Kaza with us, Nino wasn't able to use her Super Bloom, but with Kaveh, we could still blow up a Dendro course. There was only one problem. After my initial Kaveh burst, he was stuck without Dendro afterwards, since my energy recharge was a bit low. So throughout the majority of this fight, I was only using my skills to apply Dendro. And since Kaveh was my only Dendro character, it was a bit awkward just using physical attacks. We were still able to defeat a boss though, thanks to my other characters. Anyways, I took the same team to fight some Ruin Guards, and this team was pretty effective. Liyue enemies were pretty squishy, so I couldn't get a full-on rotation going, but we could still do this. The island with 4 Ruin Guards were also pretty easy. I just gathered all of them together and generated a lot of Dendro cores to deal nice damage. And eventually I was able to finish all the Ruin Guards off. So throughout day 18 and 19, I mainly focused on finishing up ascending my Kaveh to level 90. I used the Kachin comp again to fight a Dendro cube, but I got 2 creepers drop again. Although I did get a gemstone, so I guess it made up for the bad drops. While waiting for the boss to respawn, I went to farm for some artifacts. This domain was filled with actual enemies, so naturally it was hard to use a bloom team, since the enemies might just hyper bloom the Dendro cores. But Kaveh saved the day once again with his on-demand Dendro core explosion skills, so we were able to clear the domain easily. I fought the boss 2 more times, and both times I got 2 drops. So I don't know if it's only me or not, but why do I feel like getting 3 essential material drops is actually harder in world level 8? But yeah, make sure to like this video to cheer my Kaveh up. Anyways, I raised my talent level to 6 and decided to end my day here. Now we're finally reaching the end game. With over 19 days under our belt, it's time to test out the end-game team comps before we head into the abyss. I swapped my Kaveh build to more of a Dendro DPS again, and finally ascended Kaveh to level 90. I tried out a Bungeon team comp with Thoma, and this team is fire, no pun intended. Even though we have Nahida with us, Kaveh was still able to help out with Dendro applications as well, making him an important asset in this team. And with a DPS build, he does a good amount of Dendro damage, as well as applying Dendro to the enemies. This team is really good, and with minimal investments, it can deal a good amount of damage. I went to Sumeru to hunt down the consecrated beasts again, to practice for Abyss later down the road, and this team was able to defeat them pretty easily with my Kaveh still being on full HP. Between Kaveh's self-heal and Thomas' shield, Kaveh was pretty healthy as well, so they work really well together. Some enemies were pretty much dead before I could finish my rotations, but hopefully we'll get a real challenge later. On day 21, I went around collecting some materials from enemies. I used a burning team just to test out how viable it is. This team is pretty unique in its own ways, and burning down Inazuma was a lot of fun, but Kaveh also takes a lot of collateral burning damage as well. Luckily we had Baizu and Bennett with us, so it wasn't as bad because I could heal. But yeah, this team was overall pretty fun to mess around with and definitely a refresher. On day 22, I took on another suggestion to build a free-to-play scuffed Hyper Bloom team. While Kaveh definitely shines more in a pure Bloom team, this team is a pretty achievable team comp. There are definitely some issues though, with Visual not being able to apply Electro as quickly as other characters. But this team worked well against the Spectre enemies that were just floating in the air. Against the Nobushis, Kaveh could just sweep the enemies as well very nicely. I tested this team out in the domain against 2 Jewel Bishop enemies, and it actually worked out pretty well, and we were able to clear the domain with 1 rotation. So on the next day, my Kaveh turned into a physical character. Yes, I mean it. I built Kaveh with physical artifacts and went on a hunt. Physical build was pretty straightforward, with the only thing we had to do was just spam normal attacks against the enemies. While I did brought Raiden initially for super conduct to decrease enemies' physical resistance, I decided to not use her since we were farming fungi again, so we only used physical attacks. While Kaveh definitely appreciate Dendro reaction teams, physical was honestly pretty fun in general since you could just build anyone with it. But Kaveh's charge attack animation is pretty cool though, so he's automatically the best at it. Alright, on days 24 and 25, I decided to challenge the a Spiral Abyss. I tried the Alhaitham and Kaveh team suggested by once you Korean, you can't career out on floor 9, which is basically letting Alhaitham do all the work while Kaveh just sits in your team. But hey, he still gets to finish off the last hit on an enemy. Floor 9 was pretty easy for me, so we got through the second and third chamber without much trouble at all. In floor 10, I brought a spread team to see how it fares in the Abyss. The first chamber had 2 muscular reptiles, but they weren't a match against me, so we got through pretty quickly. The second chamber had a Sparky and an Electro Abyss Mage, but Kaveh activated his propeller attack to scare off the enemies. Sparky was a bit tanky, but Kaveh managed to deal with him rather quickly afterwards. Chamber 3 was a 3 for 3 mages, but I just unleashed all my skills and bursts, and hoped for the best. Kaveh took a lot of damage, but Baizu was able to heal him, and we eventually cleared floor 10. For floor 11, I brought a Burngeon team that we tried out before, and it worked out really well. Even though the enemies were tankier in the Abyss, we still depleted their health pretty quickly because this team is actually really good. In the second chamber, there were a lot of Ruin Drake enemies as well. As tanky as they were, they still couldn't withstand the Burngeon team long enough, so they all got wiped out pretty quickly. Kaveh worked really well in this team and barely took damage here. And even without a dedicated healing character, we got through the second chamber without much trouble. In chamber 3, there were some samurai enemies, but it was business as usual with Kaveh and his suitcase, and I just defeated both of the enemies together without them healing up. After that, there were some scary looking enemies we had to fight. But after I unleashed everyone's bursts, the enemies just dropped one by one, until the chunky one was the last one standing, but it still didn't stand a chance. Moving on to floor 12, it was pretty hard this time around, especially the first chamber. In my first attempt, I brought a Hyper Bloom team with Cookie with us, but the enemies were pretty tanky, to the point that I couldn't kill all of them after my first rotation. Next we had to face the Consecrated Beasts, and they had pretty high resistance against Kaveh. After realizing that, I decided to leave and try another team. I just gave Kaveh the Elemental Mastery artifact pieces this time, and I have a plan. I decided to bring Kaveh to the second half this time. In chamber 1, there were a few different waves, starting off with the fungi. I brought a pure bloom team with Nilo, called the Super Heal Bloom team, since I probably need some healing as well. I was able to clean up the fungi pretty quickly and summon the second wave of enemies, which consists of Nobushis and Kairagis. They were pretty separate, so I just waited until they came together and started to bloom them. Surprisingly, the enemies didn't move around that much, so we defeated both of them together. The final wave consists of 2 more neon enemies, who gave me a ton of trouble. They moved around a lot and staggered Kaveh, so it was pretty difficult to defeat them. I ended up getting through my first try and had a hard-fought battle, but I missed out on getting 3-star by mere milliseconds, which was honestly pretty unfortunate. Moving on to the second chamber, we had to deal with some Halucho Haluchas. This chamber was honestly way easier than the first, and the enemies died pretty quickly. The second wave had a bunch of Eremites, who all spawned additional enemies as well. Luckily, Kokomi was able to heal us, but we kept on getting frozen as well, so it got really scary. Fortunately, Nilos' bloom just killed all the enemies without me knowing what happened, and everything went by smoothly. So in the final chamber, we had to fight 3 Magu Kenkis. I unleashed all my bursts and just slashing away, before realizing the enemies were already half HP. A few more seconds went by, and they were all defeated as well. This Abyss was pretty difficult all around, but yeah, this Bloom team is definitely OP. On day 26, I tried out some more teams in the new 2.7 events. I brought a Shadow Bloom team consisting of a Shincho and a Layla combo, but I accidentally sword Pyro of Kazuha, so it kinda became a Burngeon team. Shadow Bloom was pretty fun though, and with Layla, it reminded me of the Razor Shadow Bloom team I got to try out in my Layla 0 to Hero video as well. Since the Shatter reaction skills with Elemental Mastery, which is basically shattering frozen enemies with Claymore attacks, it worked out nicely with Kaveh as well, since he also shatters the Dendro Chorus with his Burst skill. I went to try this team out against the Eon Blight Drake, and although we couldn't freeze a boss, this Shadow Bloom team still took care of it. On day 27, I went around the desert to defeat all of the Doritos, since I needed some of the drops. I went back to the Bloom team with Baizu and Sucrose, and they were pretty effective in killing the Doritos. After collecting some materials, I went to fight a giant Dorito with the same team comp, and while the boss is definitely tankier, Kaveh was able to dish out good damage, and we eventually defeated it. On the next day, I decided to get my weeklies out of the way. I went to hunt down the bounty enemies in Inazuma, and since Sparky was immune to Hydro, it was Kaveh's turn to shine, and we could test out his bloom damage. His blooms are pretty satisfying to use, since we could control whenever we wanted to pop the cores. But the only weakness that Kaveh has is that the enemies can also steal the Dendro Core reactions while our skills are on cooldown. Otherwise, against enemies without Electro or Pyro to steal reactions, we pretty much just destroy everything we see. On day 29, I went back to the event domain and tested out a different bloom team. There were some Ocean and Mimics in this domain, so Kaveh was able to generate a lot of Dendro Cores. I used Ayato for off-field Hydro applications with his burst, and with Dendro Traveler helping out with Dendro application, blooms were going off left and right. We didn't have to worry about our HP as well, because Kaveh just regenerates HP because of bloom. so I just watched as everything dies. Even without Nilo, we still did a good amount of damage and wipe out all the enemies here pretty quickly to complete this domain. On day 30, I went to fight some bosses and domains with the Nilo team to see how fast we can get through them. I started off with Azdaha and quickly phased the boss. We could barely get a rotation in before the boss decided to phase again and threw a tantrum. But yeah, we quickly defeated the boss. I went back to the Sumeru's talent domain and tested out how fast we could get through it. And needless to say, the challenge was completed before I could blink. The Nilo team is definitely the strongest for Kaveh, since all he had to do was just stand there and tank while applying Dendro, and before you knew it, the enemies were dead. Kaveh is definitely a pretty viable character with a bunch of different playstyles within his arsenal. Even though my Kaveh was only C0, he was able to dish out a considerable amount of damage. Kaveh is definitely a fun character, being able to self-heal when taking bloom damage makes him the perfect pick for an on-field Dendro driver. I definitely had a lot of fun maining Kaveh for the past 30 days, and I feel like I still have a lot to learn with my rotations. Again, thanks to everyone that commented in my last video and community post, suggesting the team comps that I could use in this video. Sorry if I missed out on your team suggestion. Next time I might include some team suggestions from my Discord server as well, as I'm more active there, so if you guys haven't joined my Discord server, make sure to join with a link in the description. Oh yeah, I'll most likely do Kirara's 0 to Hero next, so make sure to comment some team suggestions here or in the Discord. If you watch this far and haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps a lot. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.